Happy Tuesday and welcome to an emergency episode of the Locked On Red Sox podcast. As always, thank you for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. I am your host, NESN's Lauren Campbell. I will be joined shortly by my co-host, Massachusetts Pirates team insider Jake Iggy. But we have breaking news on this lovely Tuesday night. David Ortiz was selected to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. It was trending in his direction for most of the time that the ballots were becoming known and the voting was becoming very clear that many writers were voting for Ortiz. Now, as usually is the case, there were snubs such as Barry Bonds. Curt Schilling also did not make it, and neither did Barry Bonds. Roger Clemens and Curt Schilling were the top three who did not make it. They were trending well for Bonds and Clemens for a little while there, but unfortunately, they did not make it. Enough of this. Let's get into our emergency episode.
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So the biggest news coming out of Tuesday is obviously that David Ortiz officially is in the Hall of Fame. He was selected to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. The only one on this ballot, which featured a lot of big names, a lot of surprises, a lot of snubs, you could say. David Ortiz certainly deserved it. I do have my co-host Jake on the phone right now. He cannot join us on video, but he is joining by phone. So, Jake, results just dropped. What are your initial reactions to Ortiz getting in, and then people like Barry Bonds, Curt Schilling, and Roger Clemens being left off the ballot in their final year?
You know, I think this was kind of expected to start the day. We saw all over Red Sox Twitter, happy David Ortiz Day. This is going to be the day that's remembered when David Ortiz is named as a first ballot Hall of Famer. And, as fans, the people that wanted Bonds and Clemens just were crossing their fingers that, once all the results fully came in, that they'd be able to screech past the finish line of, the 70%. But, I feel like this debate over Clemens and Bonds will be talked about, for years to come. And it's just something where, people who know what they did, for people who, don't look at the steroids as the only thing that really shows what they did during their MLB career. When you look at the stats, I mean, it was kind of crazy, hearing everything. Barry Bonds, in the All-Star game 14 times, Clemens 13 times. I mean, you just don't see those types of numbers anymore. And I understand, obviously, the whole steroid component, but what we talked about throughout leading up to these results is they were good before they even took the steroids. And so, these results kind of mean that guys like Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez, doesn't matter how long they're on the ballot for, they probably won't see Cooperstown.
Yeah, it does not bode well for people like A-Rod and Manny Ramirez. And the whole steroid thing is very, very interesting, to say the least, because you have people like Barry Bonds, like Roger Clemens, who really, they're very questionable. It's David Ortiz is also questionable, but that 2003 test, we've been over this so many times in the last, really just feels like forever since he retired, because that was a big thing hanging over David Ortiz's head. But at the end of the day, it's unfortunate. Bonds and Clemens and even Schilling, they still can get in via the Veterans Committee. Who knows how long that will be, but David Ortiz, 7-time Silver Slugger, 10-time All-Star, 3-time World Series champion, over 500 home runs, and so much of what he did for that 2013 World Series team, that big speech after the marathon bombing. And for me, I grew up watching Ortiz. He came over to the Red Sox when I was 14 years old, and Jake, you're 10 years younger than me. So being able to kind of grow up with David Ortiz and kind of have that impact on you being a baseball fan, what does this mean for you as a baseball fan, just for strictly David Ortiz right now?
I mean, he's the most clutch playoff hitter in MLB history. hands down. I mean, even though I was 5 years old when 2004 happened, I don't think that the Red Sox would have even come close to coming back from that 3-0 deficit versus the Yankees. I mean, David Ortiz had so many clutch hits in 2004 alone, and then when you look at 2013 as well, what did he have? Like a 600 batting average during that World Series? And so really looking back on it, all throughout my life as a Red Sox fan, Big Papi has been in everybody's sort of words when the Red Sox come up. And it doesn't matter if you've watched a second of the Red Sox or if you've never watched a second of the Red Sox. When you hear the nickname Big Papi, you automatically think of David Ortiz. And you brought it up perfectly, Lauren, with the 2013 Boston Strong speech. That's my favorite moment of his career. And, you know, when I still watch it, it's tough to not get choked up. And just the impact that Ortiz had on the city, as well as the incredible story that he had coming over from the Minnesota Twins, and right off the bat, just making an impact, not only for the Red Sox, but for the city of Boston. I think this is so well deserved. And, you know, I find it still staggering the amount of people that found it difficult to vote for him over the 2003 potential steroid testing. But, you know, the numbers speak for themselves, and, you know, the writers made their decision.
So you haven't watched the coverage of this at all, but Rob Parker was on MLB Network, and he admitted that he did not vote for David Ortiz simply because it did not feel right. Now, I would have no issue if that was consistent throughout his ballot, but he also had people like Roger Clemens. He voted for Roger Clemens for Barry Bonds. And to me, I'm just like, I don't care if you don't vote for David Ortiz. You're wrong for not voting for him, but whatever, it's your vote. You're going to vote however way you want. But to kind of say that you don't feel right voting for David Ortiz because of the history potentially with a failed test in 2003, but then go off of Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, it's just, to me, it's a bit hypocritical. At the end of the day, it didn't matter. But I thought of you when he said that, because I was like, Jake would probably be losing his mind right now if he heard that live.
So I actually, before I left work, I was scrolling through Twitter to see if potentially any of the results would come through, just to see people's reaction before they actually did come through. And, you know, I saw Red Sox stats said nobody can screw it up more on TV today than what Ron Parker just did. And I also saw that he voted for Sammy Sosa.
Yes,
now,
he did.
I mean, voting for Clemens and Bonds, I feel like that there's a lot of, you know, the semi-modern type of writers that will agree that they deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. But Sammy Sosa, you can connect him most directly with like guys like Mark McGwire. Right. You know, some of these people who are just so blatantly steroid type of players, and it's really tough to, you know, not call him a hypocrite for, you know, not voting for David Ortiz, for, you know, maybe it not feeling right or there being a gray area over the 2003 testing. But when, even though, you know, people don't some people don't respect Rob Manfred, he came out voluntarily when it was brought up to him about the testing of 2003 of David Ortiz, and he said that, you know, it's non-conclusive that he tested for any type of steroids. And so, you know, he's going to get the wrath of it from baseball Twitter. But all it does is just put me in the same boat as Dan Shaughnessy of just, I just don't get it. I just don't.
We'll get you right back to our emergency episode of the Locked On Red Sox podcast. As always, thank you for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. Before we head into segment 2, I just need to take a moment to tell you about Built Bar. You know how much I love Built Bar by now. And now that it's the new year, we are almost through January. I cannot believe it, which means I hope you're sticking to your New Year's resolutions. And if yours is about getting fit or maybe eating a little bit healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar, or honestly, maybe even better than a candy bar. It makes it easy to stick to your resolution because Built Bars taste so good, you'll want to eat it. They're unlike other protein bars out there that may taste a little waxy. Maybe they taste like cardboard. Not Built Bar though, because they have so many delicious flavors. They're also covered in 100% real chocolate. Built Bar's macros also are absolutely incredible. They can fit any lifestyle. They have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. And here's an idea. Head on over to all of your secret treat stashes at home, in the pantry. Maybe you're like me and have a snack drawer at your desk in the office. Throw out all those sugary or calorie-filled treats and replace them with a Built Bar. So when you're craving a snack or a treat or something that you just need that little bit of chocolate and something that's healthy, grab that Built Bar because it tastes so incredible. And we have an offer for you. Head on over to built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off your order. That's LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Yeah, the voting itself, we've seen so many different ballots. I followed along this entire time with Not Mr. Tibbs on Twitter, who's a fantastic follow, especially during this time. And to see, I mean, obviously David Ortiz was trending in the right direction from the get-go, but to see some of the reasons why people didn't vote for Ortiz, but were putting people like Manny and A-Rod and Roger Clemens on their ballot, it was just the consistency. That's all we want as fans who love the Hall of Fame and who want to follow along with this voting. We want to kind of get in your head about the way you vote, especially with somebody like David Ortiz, like Barry Bonds, like Roger Clemens. And as we mentioned, this is the last opportunity for Bonds, Clemens, and Schilling to get into the Hall of Fame. So David Ortiz finished with 77.9% of the vote. Barry Bonds, who was trending around 76-77% earlier Tuesday, ended up finishing at 66, and Roger Clemens at 65.2. So close, but it's unfortunate because I grew up in the steroid era. This is part of the reason why I love baseball so much. Barry Bonds was a Hall of Famer before steroids were even brought into his name. Same with Roger Clemens. I don't think Roger Clemens ever failed a test. I have to go back and look that up, but I'm pretty sure there was never a failed test. It was just so much hubbub around him, really. So I think that at the end of the day, this is going to happen every year in someone's last year of eligibility. There's always going to be snubs, but it's going to be very interesting going forward because you have people like Bonds and Clemens not going to get in this time around. Curt Schilling, who finished at 58.6, not getting in his final time around. I mean, I don't know if voters are going to vote differently going forward, especially because David Ortiz is very polarizing in everything that's happened with him, specifically that 2003 quote-unquote failed test. But it was obviously not close enough for Bonds and Schilling and Bonds, Schilling, and Clemens there. But I mean, in my book, I think these three are Hall of Famers. It's a shame they're not going to get in, but I mean, they have the career to back it up. At the end of the day, yes, it's an award. It's the best thing that can happen, but all of them still have incredible careers to look back on.
And I think it's going to be tough for people who grew up in the steroid era. When you talk about some of the greatest hitters of all time, I mean, whether you like the steroids or not, Barry Bonds, anytime he went up to the plate, you kind of just knew that it was going to be out. And when you also look at just the accomplishments, how many MVPs he has, how many all-star appearances. I mean, it's going to be tough when you tell your kids about some of the greatest hitters of all time, and you mention Barry Bonds, and then you also have to mention the little tidbit that he didn't make it into the Hall of Fame. And then also, one of the most dominant pitchers in your lifetime of Roger Clemens. And, it's just tough to not be able to obviously name these guys. And, like I said at the start, when you look at the ballot next year, you're already going to have in your mind with Manny Ramirez, Alex Rodriguez, and, some of the other guys where it might be thought of that they took steroids, that those guys just aren't going to get in. And I think with Schilling as well, we kind of already expected that it was going to be tough for him to be able to screech in with all the polarizing comments he's had over the past few years, as well as him being asked to be taken off the ballot. But I think that fans are definitely expected this Ortiz being the only one going in, but I'm just disappointed about the Bonds and Clemens. But like you said, hopefully the committee will be able to help them screech through, that 4%. But I did find it interesting that it didn't really bump up as much as I expected from their last year's voting. But when you look at, their 10-year span, you did see a lot of writers sort of warming up to the idea of both of these guys getting into the Hall of Fame, but just wasn't enough this time around.
We have one more segment for you in our emergency podcast today of Locked On Red Sox. As always, thank you for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. Before we head into our third segment, I just want to tell you about BetOnline, because BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue our march to the playoffs and beyond. And after last week's AFC and NFC divisional round games, you will want to bet with BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all of the best sports wagering action for 2022. It's a new year, which means a new updated desktop and mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to get started and receive that 50% bonus. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games, do not wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and the easiest way to wager on all of your favorite sports. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. No, unfortunately it wasn't. And Jeff Passan of ESPN wrote an incredible article Tuesday saying how, this is the museum of baseball. The Hall of Fame is basically the museum of baseball. It tells the story of the game's best players. And when you leave out people like Barry Bonds and you leave out people like Curt Schilling and Roger Clemens, you're leaving out part of history. And yes, no one's going to forget who these players were just because they don't get into the Hall of Fame. But it's certainly a damn shame that they don't get the recognition they deserve simply because of potential steroid use or because of, Curt Schilling is a very different story. He was borderline Hall of Fame before he had all those comments and everything else that happened around him. But Passan was absolutely right. The Hall of Fame is for the best players in there. It's not the Hall of Likability. It's the Hall of Fame. It should be a numbers thing. And it hasn't been for a long time. And it's certainly, I don't see that changing because I feel like the voters are never going to change the way they vote.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, something that I've been to the Hall of Fame once, and walking past the Curt Schilling sock gave me goosebumps. And I find it fascinating that the bloody sock is in the Hall of Fame for his heroic performance. And, the player who wore that isn't able to have a plaque hung up in Cooperstown. But, obviously there's a lot of different things in the Hall of Fame from people who aren't in the Hall. But, with Schilling being a 3-time World Series champion, as well as how dominant he was in the playoffs, when you also make the argument for Ortiz too, obviously, as everybody knows, the playoffs is when it matters. It doesn't really matter what you do, before October. How are you going to perform in October when your team needs it most? And, Curt Schilling and Ortiz, were two players that stepped up to the plate when it really mattered. But, one of the two players, I guess we can say, had the likability of the baseball writers to be able to be voted in.
Yeah, it's no secret that likability is certainly plays in someone's favor. The writers wanted to keep Jim Rice out just because he was not kind to the writers. He got in back when it was still 15 years of eligibility, and you had 15 years to get in. He was able to get in on that 15th year. And yes, I know it goes a long way when people are nice and people are kind to you. And I understand kind of using that personal, maybe vendetta, or being like, well, David Ortiz was so kind to me during my first season as a writer, or David Ortiz was always going out of his way to make sure that the writers knew they were appreciated. And that does go a long way. But I feel like it's just, I know there's the character clause and integrity of the game and all that. But when you are a Hall of Fame player, your numbers are going to show that, not really your attitude there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this has been the whole argument, especially for Curt Schilling. Are we going to be voting on politics, or are we going to be voting on what he did on the field? And, I think a lot of people have brought it up about, there's sexists, there's abusers, there's rapists in the Hall of Fame, and Curt Schilling in the Hall of Fame for what he posted on social media. I guess that's just the day and age that we're in. I understand it, but something that makes me just think about this is if you brought a lot of these guys back who didn't use social media, weren't on the internet way back when, how would they reflect their personality? How would they reflect their character on the internet? And so, that's not a question that you can really answer. But the results are in, and all we got to do is now wait to see what the commission says, and the committee, and all we can do now is just debate amongst ourselves and wish that it went a different way.
Yeah, and you said it's social media. It's a blessing and a curse these days. But something that really positive that came out of it today was cameras were with David Ortiz while he was in the Dominican Republic. He's surrounded by his family. Pedro Martinez is there, so that's obviously very cool. The video itself is awesome. He's obviously a larger than life personality already. So when that phone rings, he knows the call and he knows what's happening. I'm watching it right now. It's just everyone's so excited.
That's awesome.
You can kind of see in his eyes like how emotional, and just him looking at the phone, how nervous and emotional he is. So to be surrounded by his family and Pedro is absolutely incredible. I'm so happy for Ortiz. But that's only one good example of social media these days, because you don't get that 10, 15 years ago. You don't get these raw reactions right away, immediate reactions on social media. But I'm super happy for Ortiz. Jake, I know you're super happy. Obviously, like every year, there's going to be snubs, and that's just the way it goes. Hopefully they do. Clemens and Bonds do get in via that Veterans Committee. Who knows when that will happen, but never say never. And at the end of the day, this is not just this year, but in years past, we're going to be telling our kids about snubs for decades.
Yeah. Yep. Like you said, like Justin Bieber said, never say never.
Exactly. We hope you enjoyed our emergency podcast of the Locked On Red Sox today. As always, thank you for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. It's a good day for David Ortiz, which means it's a great day for me. Please join us again on Thursday, where we welcome Boston Globe writer Pete Abraham. He did get a vote in this year's Hall of Fame ballot, so we will be talking to him about the process behind that. We are so excited to welcome him to the show this week. And be sure to check out all of the other amazing shows across the Locked On Network. Locked On Yankees, Locked On A's, Locked On Giants. Everyone's doing an incredible job, especially during this lockout, which we are praying ends soon. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at LaLaLauren, 3 Laws, Lauren with 4 R's. Follow Jake on Twitter at Jake Iggy, as well as the Locked On Red Sox podcast on Twitter at LO_Red Sox. And now that you've made Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day, head on over to Locked On Bets to make it your second listen. Locked On Bets is your one-stop shop for all of your betting needs. It's hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. Have a great day. We will see you later this week.